But like if this is a version of the elves, like I would definitely like to be this kind of elf. I remember we had that conversation at one point, like who would you want to be in like
Oh
the
yeah.
series? And these people seem like the most chill and they absolutely know how to spend their time, which is, just party in the valley.
Hi, I'm Amy.
I'm Evie.
I'm Evelyn.
And I'm Robert, and you're listening to Token About It.
I think that's the best one we've done.
I
With
totally
all
agree.
four of us?
Yeah.
Oh,
It was
Yeah,
good to
editing
see that
the
I got
first
pat
one
myself on
was
the
rough.
back.
But yay, hi everyone. We are here with chapter 3 called A Short Rest.
Hey everyone, it's Editing Evelyn. I just wanted to pop in real fast and say hello. Thank you to all the new patrons and for everyone that has been on this journey for us. Some exciting announcements is that myself and Dad, Robert, we are going to be at Balticon in May, doing some panels regarding Tolkien's work in fantasy in Baltimore during Memorial Day weekend, which is going to be really fun. And then we're also going to be at Once Upon a Con in August. That's going to be at the Gaylord in Washington, D.C., the National Harbor. So we're really excited for all of that stuff. And then again, we really appreciate all the support you guys have been giving us. And so, as a special gift, we're going to have a link that is going to be available for the first week that this is out for anyone to get Discord access because we've improved our Discord and actually got it working properly. And we just, again, want to thank all of you for how amazing you guys are. All right, back to the show.
And I think the predictions were very easy last time. You guys both assumed that there would be a short rest and that something would interrupt it.
Yes, I think that is what we predicted.
Okay.
And
All
it's
right.
pretty accurate.
So, Amy, you're going to do the summary this time. You want to take it away?
Sure. So we meet up back with our characters as they have been adventuring after kind of running away from the trolls, and they've been getting really weary. Bilbo gets kind of his first glance overlooking the Misty Mountains, or like the mountain pass that they're going to have to go through, and everyone's just kind of starting to lose steam, lose motivation. And I believe it's Gandalf helps lead them to Rivendell, where they end up staying with the elves of Rivendell, meeting Elrond. Is it with a D?
Yes.
Elrond. So they meet him, and he kind of like helps tell them more about their weapons and helps talk about I think it's like moon runes that they
Moon
find on
runes?
their map. So I'm sure we'll get more into detail, but that's the summary of chapter 3.
I guess my first question is, were you guys kind of surprised how, I guess, pleasant this chapter was kind of compared to the chaos of the first two?
I was. I thought it was very much a like just vibes chapter, which I appreciated. I was wondering like who the elves are supposed to be. Like we've talked about like what each of these like groups are, like the trolls and the hobbits and like what they represent in society. And I don't think I was like were the elves like actually vibing in the trees like when they first show up? Because like when I was reading it, I couldn't quite figure out. I wasn't expecting them to be so like chill and party because like my last watching of the elves was I tried watching the Amazon series and failed, but they do hang out with the elves a little bit in that show.
Mhm. I will say the elves definitely in the Hobbit versus the other Tolkien works. It's a time of peace. So in times of peace, you can have a little bit more fun. Is
Are
kind
the
of the
elves
way
supposed to be
I'll
like
say it.
are they supposed to be posh? Like are they supposed to be like upper Brits or like what is their are they Italians? Like they were partying like Italians the chapter.
I mean, as an Italian, I absolutely see that and agree. Even the like jabs at everyone, especially. But yeah, there's different at this point in the history, there's different groups of elves.
There is too,
Uh,
also in Lord of the Rings.
Well, right, yeah, in Lord of the Rings too, but yeah, that's what I mean in the Third Age in general. Sorry, I should have said that. In the Third Age, there's different groups of elves. So this is just the Valley elves, and the elves
Sorry, so
around
they're LA elite.
Elrond.
Got it.
Actually, no, these guys
I
are
mean,
more
LA wouldn't
mid.
have been a real thing that Tolkien was. I'm just laughing at the idea of them all having Valley Girl accents. Like I am currently living in LA, so that's now how I'm imagining the elves.
That's
That's
hilarious.
totally fine. They're very bohemian artsy is the vibe I got from this chapter.
Yeah,
Yes.
But
it was like peak
Yeah.
vibes for any chapter I could ask from like a fantasy series. Because like I think I
yeah,
was very surprised because I was expecting things to go like I wasn't actually expecting it to be a legitimate rest. Because like when it was called a short rest, you think it's gonna be it. Like they hang out with them for at least a couple of days, don't they?
They
it
stay for like
says
14
14
days.
days.
Yeah, that's a legitimate rest.
I also
Yeah.
was kind of like, I thought that more stuff was going to go down because, they have the whole little line about how dwarves and elves don't typically get along very well.
hmm
And then I was like kind of pleasantly surprised by everyone being super chill. So that was kind of a nice little like moment, to be honest.
Well, that does lead me to a question. Another question I had for both of you is talking of elves. I was wondering what your first impressions of these specific elves in this chapter and what you thought of the elves and how it mixes with your understanding of Tolkien elves and elves in general.
Okay, so I have a lot of thoughts on this. For
Okay, let's hear
one,
them.
so when I really think about like elves and like Tolkien elves, I think of like Galadriel and Elrond and Arwen like being very ethereal and very like, kind of like morose and um, just
All
kind of like
fancy
above
words.
above it all. Yeah. Um, Ethereal. And I just love that our introduction to them is literally like them singing to them from the trees about how they need to like hoof their or they have to like get their horses new shoes and that all of their beards are really long and they need to like come party with them and hang out. So it was like a very different vibe from like what I'm used to thinking about of elves like from like the later books in or at least the movies. I haven't read the other books. So it was just kind of like a really interesting juxtaposition and then for them to be just so like chill and peaceful and wanting to like entertain them and take care of everyone and kind of answer their questions. I thought that was very cool to see.
Yeah, I was expecting just kind of like super hot people that don't speak that much. But like if this is a version of the elves, like I would definitely like to be this kind of elf. I remember we had that conversation at one point, like who would you want to be in like
Oh
the
yeah.
seasons? And these people seem like the most chill and they absolutely know how to spend their time, which is, just party in the valley.
Yeah. I also was asking my husband about this because I was listening to the book earlier and I was like, I didn't think that they went because I'm like recalling the movies that I watched like years ago. And I was like, I thought they just met Lee Pace as a elf. Why is Elrond in this? So I was also very confused by that. And Colin was like, don't worry, you're gonna understand it later.
I talked to my husband about this and he spoiled something from much later in the book by accident because he
Oh, I'm
didn't
sorry.
remember where we were and he was like, nothing, nothing, and just kind of like ran
I
away.
will text you later to know out of curiosity because I don't want to spoil it for Amy.
Um,
To
I
be
did
fair.
think that the like moon ruin aspect was probably one of the coolest things I've seen. Like I love how like in this series, because like I think I've talked about this where like I've read other fantasy books like this where like the most convenient possible thing happens to them, but like it's cool as shit, so I really appreciate it happening. Because like I don't know if I've actually ever seen that used in a story before where someone has written something with moon ink or whatever it's called, so you can only read
Mhm.
it. And
Mhm.
it just so happened to be the phase of the moon,
They
where
could
you can
read it
read it.
in.
It did make me wonder
Like
if
you were
that's come up where like there's more stuff written on it that can be used for other phases, because that's how I would use that kind of thing. But I just thought it was like a really cool chapter of stuff that like I wasn't expecting to see, I guess. But yeah, I had a fun reading this one.
awesome. And I anticipated you guys asking about elves because I know, Evie, you were kind of saying like what they represent. I totally forgot to prep you, Dad, but do you think you can give us a quick summary of just when we say Gandalf and the other wizards are kind of like archangels, what elves kind of are in that mythos kind of setting?
Well, the elves were the first humanoids created.
Right.
Yeah. And they were created in the image of the Valars, which,
Are the gods.
yeah, I would think of them more as angels.
Oh, okay.
Okay. But I mean, they do help with creation.
Mhm.
And we'll get into that later on here.
Yeah, we both have some stuff for a few of the things you brought up to add context to later, but yeah.
So it's interesting because it's also interesting how much different these elves are from the elves in Lord of the Rings.
Right. And I realized I have this is my first time rereading The Hobbit since reading Lord of the Rings as well. And I forgot how dramatically different they were because I too am very used to the movie versions of the elves. So
Right.
it was kind of fun to go back and I'm just like, oh yeah, that's why I like this so much.
Well, if you watch the animated versions of Hobbit,
Mm.
the elves look closer to Gollum than they do to humans.
Yes, that is like the thing that I think of is they're more like the kind of Scandinavian Icelandic elves is the way I view the Hobbit elves.
Wait, you guys are still saying they're hot, right? Because that was like my biggest complaint with the Amazon show is the elves were not hot enough for my taste. You can't go from
Gotcha.
Orlando Bloom and Lee Pace to whatever that was. That's the
I
actor.
totally agree. You
Thank
cannot
you.
go from like Lee Pace to then friggin' Icelandic troll elves.
I will say that like I think Galadriel was pretty hot
Oh yes,
in
100%.
Rings of Power.
And
Yeah.
Arwen. But I mean, that's not Liv Tyler is basically like a goddess of the
Yeah.
people. So
Oh, I meant in the Rings of Power. I
oh,
did like Galadriel in Rings of Power.
I have not watched The Rings of Power
We
because
tried watching it. We were having trouble
not,
getting through. Matt was losing his mind during every single episode, and it was annoying listening to his commentary.
I think Matt and Colin need to get together and talk about their mutual dislike of that show.
Yeah.
Well, see, I love the show.
Really?
Yeah,
Are we
I
getting
like it.
sorry?
It's a slight rabbit hole.
No, no,
Sidebar.
I think it's interesting there because they're taking the myth of Tolkien and they're putting their own spin on it a little bit. Plus, this is part of the world that we haven't talked about at all. It's not in the books or anything. There's some callback to some of the creation myth stuff, but that's
Mhm.
about it. It's all
At
Yeah.
some
they
point,
didn't.
at some point, you should talk to Matt about the creation myth stuff because he's just finished one of the books that covers that. That's what he was reading on our flight to Australia. So like he's read like all the like expanded books by Tolkien and stuff. So like I had literally no idea what he was talking about when we were watching.
Definitely going to be like asking your husbands to come back as we go through further Tolkien works for sure because they're both hilarious on the pod.
Meanwhile, me and Amy are going to think about creating a support group for wives of Tolkien fans.
Yeah, Colin is already planning for when he comes back on the podcast for the movie episodes of The Hobbit. So
I know.
he's very excited.
Now something that I don't like is the three movies that make up The Hobbit.
So yeah, since I know that Colin wants to talk about it and us three want to talk about it, and I'm sure Matt will want to talk about it, Robert will not be participating in the live action movie discussions, except just to say in general
I have
he
not
disliked
seen them. I haven't seen them because the internet trashed them too much, so I was too afraid to watch them because I hadn't read the book. But now I'm reading the book, which might be a good segue. But chapter 3. I'm happy that I'm reading the book before. Like, I would like to watch the live action movie at some point just to see what people are talking about.
I'd love to have you watch it for the first time and then talk about it after we're done reading.
We can do a watch party.
We could do
Yeah,
a watch party.
That'd be so fun.
But yes, back to the book. Something that Evie, you said when you were talking about how you felt about this episode and how it was like really lucky that it happened to be the exact moon that they needed. I think that goes back to what you were saying last episode, where is this fate or are they just really, really lucky?
I mean, now I'm wondering if maybe is it Elron or Elrod? How do you say his name? If he
Elron.
just knew where the map was, and every night he went out and he checked, and then he realized that was the right night, so he could like impress everybody with his knowledge. But it's probably the luck thing.
Yeah, I thought it was really funny how Gandalf and Thorin were so upset they didn't think about it first.
Yeah. And that's
She get
something
for
else.
smoking weed all day. She's gonna miss things like
Hmm.
that.
Well, and that's something else. I mean, here in the first few chapters, there is a lot of luck.
Mm.
I mean,
I also
they got
think
lucky that Gandalf came back in time to turn the trolls into stone and
it's
that type
also,
of stuff. And
I was
then
gonna say,
we will eventually get into where it's knowledge
Hmm.
or seeking knowledge that becomes more important than the lucky stuff.
I also feel like they're doing a really good job of like establishing how inexperienced all these characters are. Because I think Amy pointed that out in the last chapter of
Hmm.
like it's a really great way for you to see them hopefully improve over the story. Because each chapter I'm thinking they're more and more unprepared.
Yeah, definitely. It's so fun to
Hmm.
kind of see the progression and kind of see them also kind of starting to understand their own limitations, which is kind of interesting. Like thinking about it like in the course of like a story, you always think like your protagonists are going to be like super, or like the people that you're joining a journey with are going to be like very prepared, and then just kind of see all of that crumble and them to be like figuring stuff up just kind of by happenstance is really fun.
You guys mentioning, oh my God, I just literally forgot my thought as I had, oh my God, why did I just forget what I was saying?
Because you're a Lewis.
I am.
Yeah.
You go, and I'll hopefully remember.
Yeah. So I also like how the dwarves kind of they pick on the Hobbit.
Hmm.
They pick on Bilbo. I mean,
For not knowing what to do.
well, yeah. Let's go back to the stone, the trolls. It's like you go first. You go
Hmm.
first. You're the thief.
Because of our conversation last episode, the paragraph about them, even that they stayed for a very long rest for 2 weeks, but in that rest they consulted with the elves, and it very clearly says that they welcomed the better knowledge and the better plan for that knowledge very happily. They accepted it, which I thought was interesting because, again, I agree. I always kind of expected a more of a kind of like harump from the dwarves before accepting help. But I think that also shows just how unprepared they are, that they're like, oh my gosh, any help is amazing.
I totally agree.
I have no
Um,
like bad. I mean, I guess it is making me wonder why. Like I've been afraid to read Lord of the Rings and like have not done it because like I've heard it. It's much more serious than The Hobbit. And so
yeah.
I think it's interesting from like what I remember of the Lord of the Ring movies, like comparing it to this book and like why someone might want to have characters be those personalities when you're reading a book for kids specifically, where like you don't really want to show characters that are belligerent when it comes to getting help, especially if you're going to be with someone for 2 weeks and getting hospitality. So yeah, like I do think like figuring out why Tolkien made the choices that he did for this book compared to some of the other instances that he would do for Lord of the Rings is interesting to think about when you put in context of it being a children's story.
Yeah, when he starts Hobbit, like you said, it's a story for the kids. But eventually, towards the end of it, he starts thinking about the mythology that
Hmm.
it's coming out of. He starts thinking about trying to create the mythology. But he's such an academic.
Yeah.
Um, so
Well, I have one more question to ask, like a real quick question about the elves to ask everyone. One line that I never noticed before that stuck out to me is Bilbo says it smells like elves. What do you guys think that smell is?
Candy canes.
Evie, what did
Nothing.
you say?
I said candy canes.
Oh,
Nice.
that's hilarious. I mean, I
okay, go ahead, Amy. I'm sorry, I spoke
that's
over
okay.
you.
But maybe like an incense or something like that. I kind of always have associated like elves with something like otherworldly, so or like, very fancy. So I feel like it must be something that like is not easy to access or is more like, I don't know, just not like a traditional smell that you would smell, I guess.
Maybe
Well,
petrichor.
yeah,
Mhm.
Mhm. What
Petrichor is
did
my
you?
second guess.
especially here, what I think about, I have to say, what I remember thinking about it the first time, way, way, way back when,
Hmm.
I was thinking about just the smell of clean,
Mm.
like, like sheet coming out of the dryer, living furniture polish, things like that.
Hmm.
It's just things that smells that I associate with clean, but not sterile,
Hmm.
not like the, not like smelling like a hospital with bleach and ammonia, but I mean, it's more like
Hmm.
a clean smell, and that has more to do with
Almost like
that has more to
rain.
do.
Do you know who the elves were like? Because now I'm wondering if they would just smell like flowers or like roses. Because like I always imagine the elves as being like upper society
Mm.
of
Hmm.
the UK, and like they would all have really fancy floral like perfumes. I feel like.
Yeah. For me, I actually, because I know about like the different groups of elves, I was just kind of thinking like what these particular ones would smell like, which I immediately thought raspberry and vanilla
Hmm.
was kind of, it just came from like the vibes of the chapter.
That reminds
But
me
I
so much
also,
of The Witcher. What is it, like boysenberries and cream or
yeah,
something?
I feel
but I
like they would
also,
smell like people like living in the woods though too at the same time. Like I had a hard time kind of imagining like what their like base camp looked like because like it sounds like it's just kind of I mean like a house in the valley. But I assume like it's because like everything I've ever seen of the elves in the movies or whatever and in the Amazon show too is it's really elaborate buildings and marble and it's not but like it was such a warm chapter of like singing and laughing and helping people out and giving hospitality that like when I was reading the chapter, I wasn't actually imagining it how I normally associate like where the elves live, if that makes sense.
hmm,
Do we know
yeah.
what their house looks like?
Yeah, I guess if I'm thinking about like them being in the trees, it makes me think of like when we first meet Galadriel in the movie Fellowship of the Ring, where they're like kind of in the trees and things are kind of like they have like the walkways built around the trees. But
Mm.
Hmm.
so that would be like the first thing that comes to mind, and just being very elaborate and very like almost like natural, but turned into I was gonna say turned into furniture, but that's not right. Turned into
I'm
like
imagining like the
structures.
Ewok village, which I know is the
Yeah.
total opposite.
Yes, kind of like
Yeah.
Ewok Village.
The Ewok village. I've never thought of that connection.
Yeah.
That's pretty
I
cool.
like that.
It's like Robinson Crusoe, like any kind of big treehouse vibes.
Going into the more academic stuff, talking about Tolkien being an academic earlier, you wanted to talk specifically about a couple things first, Robert.
Yeah. So Tolkien knew about runes, and he knew how they were supposed to properly be used. I mean, like today, people say this rune means so and so, and they say a word because they're thinking of it just like Oriental languages, and but it's not that way. They were each shape had a particular sound to it. Tolkien would have known about and the two most famous examples of the ruins are both Christian in nature right away. So there's what's called the Frank's casket, the ruin from 700 AD. There's a border around carved in the uh, into the casket, and it's the story of the wise men.
Oh,
Mm.
Right?
wow.
And then the second example is what's called the Ruthwell cross, and it was carved in the 8th century with the ruins that tell part of the story of Dream of the Road, and that's a song. And so Tolkien uses the runes in the Hobbit as a phonetic alphabet like they were originally used.
Hmm.
And then what's interesting, I just learned this looking this stuff up this time, but it's also interesting that Gandalf leaves the rune for the G on the door.
Hmm.
The letter G or the sound G, as the runes were originally, was drawn like an X. So it's
Hmm.
basically X marks the spot for that. That's what I always thought, which I thought was funny.
That's pretty amazing that it
That's
is
kind
so
of
kind
right.
of like tongue in cheek almost, you know.
Yeah. And then the other little thing I want to touch on is it's not so important here, but I think it's interesting to note Tolkien took a lot of time when he was creating his world trying to figure out the moon.
Hmm.
He he ends up writing a moon, a creation of a moon, but where he comes out, so before the Apollo missions, I kind of found my note. So before the Apollo missions, there was three theories about what the moon was, how the moon was made. The first one is the moon as Earth's sister, so they're both nearby, created on their own out of the same material. There's the daughter, which is born from the Earth, and and then there's also what's called the wife, which is born elsewhere in the solar system and was free floating and got grabbed by Earth's gravity. And that's some of the stuff that and originally Tolkien was trying to figure out how to add some of that stuff into it. It just ended up not doing it. So he had a hard time. He knew exactly what he wanted to do with Durin's Day. So Durin's Day is that's the dwarven New Year, and it's the last cycle of the moon to begin autumn. It's also the day when both the sun and the moon can be seen in the sky together. So that's was interesting that Tolkien wanted to do that. And he couldn't figure out how to do that, knowing what he knew. So he actually makes, even though Middle Earth is supposed to be Earth, he actually makes the ball of Earth a little smaller, just so he can work with his ideas about the moon. And if you're really, really interested, I'm just going to mention. So there's an article by Christine Larson. She is a professor of physics and astronomy up in Connecticut State, and she has done this look at creation myths and how people use the stars and so forth in fantasy books. So she's written a whole bunch of articles like that. But the information, most of the information I'm getting came from her.
Yeah, could you email
Came
me
from her.
those? Because I would love to read them.
I was gonna say, if you could, I see you have like a whole like printout of a couple of them. I can also put them on the description of the titles of some of these in the summary for the episode as
Yeah,
well.
and then I'll yeah,
That
and
would
then
be
yes, well,
fantastic.
I'll send you the one that especially send you the one from Kristen Larson because that took me forever to find a copy.
Yeah, it did actually. But yeah, random fun fact: I have a rune tattoo, a Norse rune tattoo.
Do you know what letter it's supposed to be?
Yes, it is the Urux making the y sound, and it is used to represent strength and power of will, and it's very earth grounded. And a lot of the words and rune, like further like combination runes, that's what it is used to represent within those higher runes that take from that one. Ha ha ha. I want to go ahead and expand on this slightly because one of the things that I know you guys mentioned about the moon runes for, and how I know, Evie, especially, you were saying that you've never seen that before. Through about 4 hours of trying to look at it, it looks like he is the first one to actually use these moon letters to be written with. It looks like is a concept that he came up with himself.
Yeah, and I don't know if I've seen like moon runes used before, but the only other time I feel like I remember seeing runes being used that kind of way, at least in fiction, like the only one that really sticks out is like Stardust by Neil Gaiman in the movie, and then
Mm.
also in the book, like the one of the I think it was like Prince Septimus, like he has an advisor who's using runes to help him locate the fallen star. And there's like a great moment where he like tricks the person, but it's really good. That's the only thing that really comes to mind, but I don't think that was specific to moons.
Yeah, I love that movie. I watched it because Amy and Colin recommended it to us. Yeah, I think that like what's so cool about reading The Hobbit is like because like I know we talk about vibes and like we're saying it like kind of like in a joking way or whatever, but like I do think adding stuff like, this is something that can only be seen from like the light of the moon, and it's very atmospheric, and I think it does a really good job of just kind of absorbing you into the story from having like little details like that aren't necessarily like overly explained, because like I hate it when people overly explain magic. And so like it's a great, I don't know, like using different ways of like mythology, because like I love studying myths and story, but like adding the personalities into the story as well that you would normally have missing from like those mythic tales of why I think this is such a fun book to read.
Yeah.
Well, to over explain the magic system,
Where to go.
I I do have, so one of the things that people have been trying to figure out is, we're told in the book that it was created by dwarves and the system to write in moon runes has been lost, just that they were written in silver pens. So a lot of Tolkien academics, they think that it is made of Ithildin, which is a more liquid substance made from mithril, which in Tolkien's work is this very elusive metal that is very light but very strong. And the liquid substance made from it, it only reflects starlight and moonlight. So most Tolkien academics believe that it was the Ithildin or something very similar that the dwarves actually used to write it.
You know, I hated every part of that. I like it a lot more when it's just magic and you just accept it as is.
Still dwarf magic, but it's lost
I mean,
dwarf
where do the
magic, and we as
academics, not to
academics
make
don't
fun
even
of
know.
Robert, but like where do the academics get the, like they're just reading the books and guessing, right? Like there's no like
Well, some
actual, I think there's no
well,
explanation at any of the point in the books for
well,
what
some of it is some of that comes from his letters. You know, there was a time when he would answer fans' letters,
Oh,
and
wow.
and somebody in some I don't know if this is one particularly, but somebody probably wrote him a letter say, "How's that work?" And he's like, "I don't know." And he figure it out.
Yeah,
And so I want to go down a rabbit hole for a minute.
about that
No,
specifically.
no, something aim. Well, when we're talking about the Stardust.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've watched Neil Gaiman's master class, and he
Oh,
spends a lot of time in the beginning talking about how big of a fan he is of Tolkien, that Tolkien was able to create a world. So how, because he talks about how many fantasy writers, our world, and something goes cockeyed,
Mhm.
or it's a secret thing. Dwarves are living in secret around us, that type of stuff. But I just thought I thought that was interesting that you brought up Neil Gaiman, because he's really, I mean, he talks a lot about how his love for Tolkien, and then he discovers C.S. Lewis through Tolkien
oh
and so
yeah.
forth.
I would love to
And he
watch that
still
now.
has his, and he still owns his two copies from childhood. I can't remember if it's the C.S. Lewis book or if it was the Tolkien book, but he got it. He bought it secondhand, so it was already kind of ratty, and he still has it. They even show his bookshelf and all these nicely bound stuff, and these two old beat up books sitting there right beside them.
Aw. I think it just kind of shows you how much these kind of books really inspired people. And like this was really like, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but right, this was like the beginning of fantasy for a lot of people and a lot of people's introduction into the world of fantasy. And like Evie said, we've talked a lot about vibes and kind of like how it makes you feel. And I think that is one thing that's always been very like charming about fantasy, is that it really does draw you in and immerse you. And it feels very cozy while also being very like um otherworldly and exciting too.
Mhm. There's this, so I actually found a different article by Christine Larson where she actually goes into the science of Durin's Day, but I'm not going to get into that. I'm just going to say that she starts out her paper with a quote from Tolkien where he says, "You have at any rate paid me the compliment of taking me seriously, though I cannot avoid wondering whether it is not too seriously or in the wrong directions." And he wrote that in response to a letter that he got asking, there, you will notice there are, if you know anything about moon cycles and stars, there's a lot of inconsistencies, and he doesn't actually write it. He didn't write it properly. That's one of the things he edited the most, was the moon cycle throughout the Hobbit to make it actually like work in a real life thing. But there's only so much he can do, and so the article just talks about a lot of people have written to him and have tried to deconstruct how the whole moon thing works for everything. And even Tolkien's just like, sometimes you just got to go with the vibes. And I think that's what we really got from this chapter as well, is just the vibes.
Right.
I don't know how I could live with myself if Tolkien called me a nerd on blast like that. Because that's basically what he's saying, is like, you need to chill, calm down.
It is
True.
Sometimes you just kind of have to enjoy it, turn your brain off a little bit.
I think that there's
Right.
like this need to like want to understand and like want to because like when you think about magic, like I think everybody wants to be able to do magic, and so like you want to know like, well, how does that work? Like how would I interact with that thing if it was like in my life? But I think that when you're in an actual fantasy world, it's so normal that like you wouldn't even think about it. Because like I'm sure that like if you told Tolkien about cell phones, he would probably have a similar reaction that we have to it, where he would, or well, I mean, like to magic, where because like for me, like I'll toss my cell phone across the room because but it holds infinite amount of knowledge, and that's its own kind of magic, but it's so normal to us that we don't even think about it. So that's part of why I love it when they don't overly explain things, because like if you were in a magical world, most things you really wouldn't question it because it's just how your world works. And I think that's
Right.
much more
Yeah.
natural. If that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I think that's a great way to look at it.
The only other thing that I wanted to mention as well is the map itself. This is Tolkien being a huge freaking nerd as well, because were you guys able, most Hobbit copies have a picture of that map that Tolkien drew. Have you guys been able to see that? And I'll put a link to an image of that in our episode description too for everyone listening.
I don't look up anything. I was told to be the idiot of the show, so I try to be as authentically stupid when we do these episodes.
I also
That's
am
fair.
trying to not look anything up, but that's more out of laziness.
It's usually like on the opening cover and you just can't help but notice it. That's why I was wondering if you two had seen it.
There
I'll
is a
definitely
map.
send you.
Like there's a map in my book, and I'll look at the map sometimes, and I don't know if that was the map that he made.
I'm
If it, yeah.
listening.
Yeah. The
Audible.
map that he drew, it's got a very willowy looking hand pointing at this place in the mountain where the secret door is,
Mhm.
which is interesting because out of context, if you didn't have what was written in the moon runes, you would just wonder, why is this finger being pointed at this mountain?
I was trying to like quickly find it to like just put it in the chat for you guys. And they have the fancy one from the movie. Okay. I found it. So I'll put it in the Zoom real fast so you guys can also just kind of see it. So that's sending so you guys can see it. But yeah, this is what Tolkien himself drew. And it has the moon runes shown on what it actually says.
Oh, yes, I have seen this map. We literally have one framed in our house. Sorry.
I am not surprised. But yeah, so this is the map that Tolkien himself drew, and I love his little smog drawing by the Lonely Mountain. When you look at this style of what he drew, it is directly like Anglo-Saxon maps that were from like kind of the time period that he's drawing on as inspiration for like the old-timey type vibe. And there's actually a very famous map called the Cotton Map that's very, very similar down to like the finger pointing and the way that everything is drawn and even written, that was at Oxford and was being studied at Oxford around the same, like at the same time period that Tolkien was a professor there. So a lot of people agree that was most likely an inspiration for him, but Anglo-Saxon maps in general, it is what the style is replicating.
Can I ask a loaded question? Because like it's something I've been thinking about when we talk about like where he's getting inspiration from for these myths. And like we mentioned Anglo-Saxon, we've mentioned like Scandinavian myths. Like, is any of this coming from like the Aryan pureblood race theories at all? Because like obviously Tolkien would be well aware of that.
That he's yeah, he has been accused of that, but I don't think
I would disagree because he very famously hated Nazis. Like
Yeah,
he hated Nazis from the beginning. He hated the entire idea of the Aryan race ideology that they had. So I'm gonna go with no. Like, and he hated it to the point that he refused to let The Hobbit be published in Germany
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, I
because
mean,
because
it's
yeah,
unfortunate
it
'cause,
was
like Matt and I have talked about before how like you got to be careful when you're talking too much about like white people history and white people myths because like you can attract this like finding out that moon ruin has been kind of taken into that
well, that's I agree
bubble
because
or whatever. Like it can get
yeah.
difficult when you try to have these conversations about stuff because people have taken it and turned it into their
something.
own thing. And I would imagine like you could make a lot of metaphors out of the Tolkien stories for trying to equate it into like our social structures. And like I've kind of been interpreting it just as like him trying to do his own thing and trying to like because like he didn't have Google, so this would just be kind of coming off of stuff that he knew about from books and reading. And like that's how I prefer to think of it as, but like the more we get into it, the more I'm like, I hope that this isn't something that's not bueno. Um
No,
yeah,
that's
that's just like
absolutely fair. That's part of having like this multi-generational kind of mindset between like us three being millennials versus Robert being an Xer boomer cusp. Um, but yeah, definitely reading it from a modern perspective, there are things that make you go, oh, like I hope that's not taken the wrong way type of thing. But I agree, he was just such a huge nerd about like Norse, Anglo-Saxon, and Icelandic like old stories. That's just what he loved. And so that's just what he drew inspiration for, just like people love Tolkien and draw inspiration from him now. So again, something else that we mentioned, and this is my last note. But if anyone else has notes after this, go for. Oh no, actually, I have another small note. But anyway, we get our first taste of the Misty Mountains here, and so this is where I wanted to bring up the inspiration for the Misty Mountains themselves. Tolkien actually wrote, "From Rivendell to the other side of the Misty Mountains, the journey, including the glissade down the slithering stones into the pine woods in Rivendell, is based on my adventures in Switzerland in 1911." So Tolkien, he was able to go to Switzerland and he hiked across the Alps as a young man. And he was so overtaken with their beauty that's where the inspiration of the Misty Mountains themselves come from. Because as we're reading it, it will become very obvious that that is exactly what he is describing.
That's very cool. I've always wanted to go to Switzerland, and I have heard that that was what had inspired him, but I didn't know for sure. But very cool.
I've been to Austria and like, seen the Swiss Alps, I think. And they're really tall. That terrifies me. Like you can't see the top. Um
Wow.
and yeah, I mean that fits. Like I don't know, like it was we went to like a castle, I think, in Austria. And it's really bizarre being that high up and kind of like looking around and like you look down and you're just seeing like mountain just kind of everywhere. So yeah, that would make sense to me because I was wondering like I think in my head I naturally think of like Appalachia just because that's like where I'm from.
Yeah.
Um, but like I was kind of I really like the aesthetic. I like when I saw that phrase too, like Misty Mountain. I'm like, that's cool. That's like a
Mhm.
that's a fun phrase. Like just adding Misty to it makes it just a little makes it a little cooler.
Yeah, a little magical.
Yeah.
So my actual last note is just a line that I never noticed before, but now that I have read Lord of the Rings, I have a lot of questions about this particular sentence. So Dad, you might have to chime in here since you read Lord of the Rings, but it's mentioned in the movies too, but the line is I have Elrond says this when he's looking at the swords. I have heard that there are still forgotten treasures to be found in the deserted caverns of the mines of Moria.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
I never got that because I never read Lord of the Rings and I've seen the movie, but I never made that connection before. So that line like really stood out to me. Did any of you guys look at that?
yes. So around the third time that I listened to it, I was like, oh my gosh, they're talking about Moria. I was wondering if that was like foreshadowing to later on in the Fellowship when they try to go through the mines of Moria. Um,
Hmm.
and of course, Gimli's like famous line of, and they call it a mine. A mine.
I did have a question, and I might have misremembered what Robert said. I thought you said that Elrond was later added to this, unless it was the name of a city that was added, because like I know there's different like um versions of the book. Was like all of this originally in like where it is Elrond and it is like would that be something that he would have added later?
I from what I remember looking at that he expands on Rivendell and elves because originally
He just doesn't have a name for him.
yeah, but also originally Elrond's title is half elf.
Mhm.
So he's calling him a half elf here in the Hobbit, but then when we get into the Lord of the Rings, that terminology doesn't exist. And also the fact that um, the elves are the elves themselves as a race seems to be a lot less uh, jokingly
Joyous.
joyous,
Mhm.
yeah, and so forth. So, but yeah, I know that I know that he would make changes. So that's why when people talk about in the so and so chapter from the 1975 edition, because he was always making changes. Well, just
So yeah, I didn't even think of that, but for that particular line, I think I'm gonna go back and look to see if that was an original line or if that's something that he added. That makes me curious now. So,
Yeah, that was just I didn't I don't know if I particularly like real like I said like very no very little about Lord of the Rings, but like once you get pointed out, I was like I wonder if that would be something he would add later because like it does add, you know, it adds a little oomph to like the story of hearing like I mean people just like Easter eggs in general. And that
mhm.
sounds like a really obvious Easter egg. Obviously, he could have just decided later on to put everything there because he made that line. Um,
Yeah.
but you know, it chicken or the egg kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, the line really it reminds me of two authors that I really like, Rick Riordan and Rochelle Mead, where they don't revise their stories, but what they do is they leave some open-ended stuff, like some little mystery or question for the future or route to take for the future, where they can go back and use that little plot bunny and then run on it, because we get something like that in Rick Riordan mentioning like a couple little things in the Percy Jackson series that that it's like, but that's like a story for another day type thing. Or Rochelle Mead, who wrote Vampire Academy, she put like slipped in a couple of things about there being more than just vampires out there, and then she expanded on it. And I just think it's always just a question of, did they have an idea where they would want to go with it, or did they just leave that idea there so they could come back if they wanted to?
Yeah, and I think that also just kind of like one is like the mark of a writer where your mind is always kind of like thinking, moving towards something new too, and maybe is also part of like the writing industry as well of like getting things published and oh, what could I explore next? Or what if I add this thing in too, And sometimes it is kind of like, who knows? Kind of like how we were talking about magic, like maybe we need to
Mhm.
just kind of let the writers do their thing.
My personal favorite is when people find something like that and they'll like ask the writer about it, and the writer will be like, "Yes, that's exactly what I was doing." And then the writer will do an interview and be like, "Yeah, I completely forgot about that, but it worked out great for me." So like I wouldn't be surprised if there's some instances where people write stuff and then they plan on writing an expansion or something else within the same world, and they're like, where could I take this from? And they just go back and look over their old stuff, and they're like, yep, I'll just take it from this point right here. It's also good that they do that, because like I've also seen where writers write like something very particular, but it doesn't really work for the next story they want to do, so they just completely like disregard it, and they're like, yeah, I'm just gonna, no one's gonna notice that. But of course, if you're a big enough fan, you'll notice everything.
The Last Jedi.
Don't
We
talk to me
won't
about
go
that
down that
movie.
rabbit hole.
No, let's
Don't
not
talk to
do
me about
that.
that movie. Trying to have a peaceful Sunday.
Well, back to the short rest. Do you guys have any other direct chapter thoughts?
I loved it.
No.
It was a good chapter.
That's cool.
Yeah.
What's the next chapter called?
I was just about to ask for predictions. It is called Overhill and Underhill.
I would say if I were to make a prediction that they are going to be maybe going towards the mountains and possibly going under some of the mountains or going into caves of some sort. I don't know. That's my best prediction.
Okay.
I'm thinking of like the Super Bowl commercial where they're trying to throw like Arnold, like the Paramount one.
Oh
And
my
they're
God, I
trying
love that commercial.
to
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I'm thinking. But I assume there's some kind of like maybe pathway or something that's through the mountain rather than going. I don't know. Like, I feel like this journey is getting way longer than they advertised it to be. So I would hope they have some kind of shortcut coming up. That's my prediction. I don't really know what's going to happen. None of the chapter titles make sense to me.
It's okay. I know we bring it up all the time, but episode titles are not my forte for prediction either. Especially if I don't know what the words mean.
I just think about like, because like I think in the first chapter or whatever, like that's how they describe like the Hobbiton area or whatever, with like that's the hill that like everybody's on. So like that seems
Yeah.
to seem the thing. I am now wondering like who's taking care of Bilbo's house. I'm sure he didn't realize he was going to be like on a several month long journey. I didn't think it was going to be several months. Like I thought it was going to be like a week that it took them to get to the place.
I might
No,
know too much.
I'm just very happy that I do know the answer to that question, because I'm usually the person asking the questions back in Lord of the Rings. So I'm just grinning. But no, keep that in mind. Yeah, definitely keep that question in mind.
I'm
Cool.
pretty sure I might know the answer to that one, but I won't say.
So I'm just going to sign us off if we're ready.
Let's do it.
All right. We've been a bunch of people with rabbit ears getting ready for Easter and going through rabbit holes. It's been talking about it. We'll see you later.